This episode is a rambling reflections from the road episode, one of those solo episodes. In this particular episode, as I'm driving, I am struggling with the frustration of knowing I have so many things to do, so little time to do them, deadlines galore, trying to juggle these projects, and I'm talking my way through how I might be able to solve these problems. And that's coming up in this episode.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 371 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. This is a rambling reflections from the road episode, and I'm recording this as I'm driving between Waterloo and Hamilton, Ontario. This episode is going to be hopefully a single take episode. I'm going to avoid editing as I normally do. I am consciously trying to make sure not to use as a placeholder as I am thinking about things that I'm going to say. I am most likely going to actually make an edit if I cough or clear my throat, because that is just damn annoying for you listeners, and I understand that. But one of the reasons I'm not going to be editing it is I am running out of time. And that's the content, or the context, or the theme, I should say, for this particular episode. So this episode is sponsored by the patrons of the Stark Reflections podcast, as well as those who support this podcast over at buymeacoffee.com/Mark Leslie. So thank you to my coffee buddies, as well as those who support the podcast over at patreon.com/Stark Reflections. Really appreciate you guys. Thanks for your support. There won't be any bumpers, as that would require extra time and extra editing. And as I said, the theme or topic for this episode is running out of time. I'm recording this on, Thursday, July 18th. And on July 19th, I get on a plane bright and early. I have to be at Toronto Pearson Airport at 5 a.m. for a 7 a.m. flight direct to Denver. Then when I'm in Denver, I am renting a car to take the 3+ hour drive to Gunnison, Colorado, where I'm going to be completing my final week of residency for the Western Colorado University master's degree in creative writing with a focus on publishing. I'm just calling it the Masters in Publishing for short. It's going to be an exciting, fun-filled week, as it was last year when I did the week of residency there. This year I am going to be staying off campus. A couple students and I got together and secured an Airbnb. That's because one of the other students, like myself, is going to have their spouse there, and spouses are not allowed to stay in residence. So that's where we're going to be at the off campus. But following that week, I graduate with my master's in publishing on the 26th, Friday the 26th, and I'll talk a little bit about the episode that's going to be coming out then. And then that night, right after the graduation ceremony, Liz and I are going to be getting on a plane and we're driving back to Denver that night. We're staying at a hotel near the airport, so that first thing in the morning in Denver, we can hop on our flight to New York City, and we will be meeting up with some friends who will be joining us in New York City on Sunday. And then Monday, July 29th, which will be the 10th anniversary of the very first date that Liz and I had when we met for a beer at Amsterdam Brew Pub on the waterfront in Toronto. We are going to get married. So we're getting married on the 10th anniversary of the day we met, which I think is quite apropos. We initially were going to get married in July of 2020. I proposed to Liz in May of 2019 on my 50th birthday. I had Alicia Witt custom write a song that she performed live on my 50th birthday at the Horseshoe Tavern in Toronto, and we were supposed to get married in July of 2020. Of course, the world had other plans for us. We continued to put the wedding off, and being the procrastinators that we are, we decided to do the elope thing. So we're meeting up with a couple friends, getting married in Central Park. They're going to be our witnesses, and Liz has got the wedding dress, I've got my tux, and we'll be spending the day doing fun wedding things, pretty low-key, kind of romantic, particularly because the two of us have a fondness for New York. And then we get married, we spend a few days in New York. I'm back for just a few days before I am off again to Vegas. I'm going to be there for an anthology workshop with Christine Catherine Rush and Dean Wesley Smith. And I'm editing an anthology about haunted taverns, etc. And then I come back for a few days. Liz and I are co-hosting the Aurora Awards, the 2024 Aurora Awards. And that's a live stream broadcast providing awards for science fiction, fantasy, and horror. In the Canadian scene, it's kind of like the Canadian Hugo Awards. It's voted on by members. And this year, Colonel Chris Hadfield is being inducted into the Hall of Fame. He's not only merely an astronaut and a musician, he's also an author. He has written a couple of novels as well, but he's being inducted into the Hall of Fame. I already have his pre-recorded acceptance speech, as I have the pre-recorded acceptance speeches for the other two inductees into the Hall of Fame. But then we do the Aurora Awards, and then a few days later, I am off to Calgary for When Words Collide, and then I think I'm back for a couple weeks before I go on a whole bunch of other trips. All that is to say, I have a lot going on, and I'm at a point where I sometimes get where I think I may have bitten off more than I can chew. I have a lot of stories to still read for the anthology workshop. I'm only halfway through the first batch of submissions for my anthology alone, and I have to read stories for the other anthologies. So with my anthology, I have to read the submissions. There's a batch of submissions that I have to provide feedback on in person in Vegas for part of the workshop. There's another batch of stories that I haven't even gotten to yet that are written by other people who will not be attending in person, but who are part of the submission consideration process. Now, for those submissions, I do not have to provide a critique. I can read the story, and if I like it and I want to publish it, I say yes. And if I don't, I say, thanks, try again, whatever. I don't have to provide any feedback. And then there's a bunch of stories from professionals, other professionals in the marketplace. And I don't have to provide critiques of those stories. I just have to decide if any of them I want to publish, I publish. So that's for my anthology, but there are 4 other anthologies, I believe, that I have to read for. Now, with those other anthologies, again, there's going to be the batch of stories that I have to read and critique. I don't have to read the other stories that the other editors are going through like I am those other 2 batches, so that will lighten my load. But it is a significant amount of work. And it's one of the many things I have to do before I leave. So one of the things, of course, I have to do before I leave, and again, I'm not going to get all that done, obviously, before I leave. So I'm going to be getting some of this work done on the plane. Well, let me back up. Let me back up 1 second. The concept of this episode was me trying to talk my way through how am I going to try to fit in all these things that are important. Now, the other thing that's going on is I'm not going to see my son for 2 weeks. And I am on my way to Hamilton to go visit Alex, just to have dinner, etc., and then get back home, pack everything up, get everything ready, and get up super early tomorrow to get my butt to the airport. But there's a lot of things I need to get done in a very limited time frame. So when I think I've bitten off more than I can chew, how am I going to get through these things? Well, the first thing is, of course, prioritizing, and I prioritize obviously the things that are the most important to me. So going to visit Alex is critically important to me. So even though it's an hour drive each way, and obviously I'm going to spend a couple hours there, and that's kind of takes 4 hours out of my day, that's a high priority. So in those 4 hours, there's so many things I could get done, but I'm making sure I'm taking care of the most important things, which is Alex and going to visit Alex. So that's an important aspect. So that being said, when am I going to do the other things? So the stories, I took some stories, Liz and I camped earlier this week. I printed off, and I normally don't print off stories that I'm reading like this, but I went through so much paper, but I printed off a batch of stories to read and critique, and I actually read a bunch of them while sitting in front of the campfire, while getting up early, while Liz was sleeping, and having my coffee in the morning. And even when she was driving to and from the campsite, in the passenger seat, reading and making my notes for these stories in a notebook. I will continue to do that sort of work on the plane. I've got a 4-hour plane ride, and I'm not going to be able to do it for the whole time, but I'm going to fill as much of the time as I can with some of the other critiquing or critiques, read-throughs and critiques of those stories. What I'll have to do is with the other stories that are on a shared Dropbox, I'll have to download them to a local drive, so I don't need to connect to the internet. I may still purchase Wi-Fi when I'm on my flight, in order to stay on top of some of the work that I do with Draft to Digital. And that's the other thing, is I'm still going to be maintaining the work that I do with Draft to Digital, even when I'm in this residency. I've booked several days off, of course, for the wedding, but for this residency, I'm going to be in a different time zone, but I'm still going to be getting up super early, so I'll still be able to get a few hours of work in every morning before I go to class. I'll still be able to get some things taken care of during lunch break, which is overly generous, overly long. It doesn't take me very long to eat. I can get some work done then, as well as in the evenings when I'm not doing other social things in the evenings. And of course, even sometimes there's occasionally moments of the class where I may be intimately familiar with what they're going through, so I might, as I did last year, dip in and just take care of a few bits of work, 15 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 5 minutes the other place. That's the way I sometimes have to get things done. I also have going on a Kickstarter that I've talked about on the podcast before, and I've got it approved by the good folks at Kickstarter. I have it up in preview mode, and I've also emailed that out to my newsletter for asking them to follow me, so I can kind of get to 10 people who want to be notified, I should say, when not followed, but want to be notified when the Kickstarter goes live. And sometime next week, most likely, I'm going to be launching this Kickstarter. I do have to provide the feedback link to a few people so I can make some edits and tweaks. That's not to mention the book I'm publishing, Undaunted, by homicide detective Dave Sweet and Susan Forrest. I've gotten some work done with that. I've sent the final version off to the printer, as well as loaded all that up to get that published through Draft to Digital with the payment splitting, and not to mention a couple other projects, publishing projects that I'm helping some other authors with. So even just talking through this right now, there's a lot to get done, and a lot of it's going to be fun and exciting, right? Like graduating, getting my master's is going to be thrilling. We're launching the book Feisty Felines on the 26th of July, as well as sort of the official kickoff of the special projects like the Thoreau book on excursions and or walking and other excursions, and all the other great public domain titles that we've each released as our solo projects. That's going on Wednesday, which is going to be very exciting. There's like open mic readings and things like that. I think that's on the Thursday night. And then, of course, the graduation on Friday. And then just a few days later, I'm getting married. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, when I sit back and think about all the things I have to get done, I panic. Because I recognize there's not enough time to get all the things done. So, here are some of the decisions I've made. I'm going to visit Alex. That's going to take 4 hours out of my day. That means I don't have time to do the editing of the podcast for today, particularly because I had other work I needed to get done for Draft to Digital, etc. I did end up editing earlier the episode that's going to be going live next week. It's edited. The show notes are ready to go for that. I still have to add my opening and closing bumper stuff, which I'm sure I can sneak in sometime next week and get that out. I also have to complete the Patreon only audio feed, which is an additional half-hour interview with Rick, my guest next week, Rick Hibson, talking about writing reviews and interviews with authors as sort of nonfiction, because he's kicking off a book that launches on the 26th. So there's these pieces that I can do now, there's pieces I can fit in later on, and I'm recognizing that I may not have long stretches of time to get all these different things done, but I can still chunk some of the work out in ways that don't overwhelm me, or in ways that allow me to make little baby steps forward. They're not the big giant strides I would want to normally make, but they're baby steps. And they are steps in the right direction. So that's an important thing to consider. So even, as I've mentioned, even just turning on the record button, deciding this episode is going to be relatively loosey-goosey, but this episode is going to be relatively open-ended in terms of just me talking off script and not worrying so much about editing, except of course for the throat clearing and the coffee and etc. And I hope I got all of them. If I didn't, someone let me know. Please let me know. I could go back and fix that afterwards so that future listeners don't have to suffer what you had to suffer through. But I realized I've got an hour in the car. What can I get done in that hour? This would be a perfect opportunity for me to figure out a great way to take some of those stories and have them read to me by some AI reading device. Because it doesn't really matter the inflection or anything. I'm reading them as an editor thinking about wanting to acquire them. That could have been a good use of time. Maybe I could have gotten through 2 or maybe 3 stories. I know I'm a really slow reader, and when I have the manuscript in front of me, I make little pen scratchy notes. I make little pen scratchy notes on the manuscript itself, and then when I finish the story, then I open up my notebook and I write out longhand some of the things. I usually look for things like moments in the story where I was really pulled in and intrigued, or certain lines of text that just so beautifully, perfectly written, or that captured an emotion in some captivating way. Maybe a piece of dialogue or a snippet or something that the writer described in the story that just resonated with me. I want to pull those elements out because when I'm critiquing a story, even if it's a story I'm not going to purchase, I want to provide the author some feedback on how I reacted as a reader to the story, so they could at least see, okay, so even if the overall story didn't work, or that maybe the ending fell flat, or the premise didn't excite me, there were redeeming elements in their story that I think are notable and I want them to be aware of, because that is such an important aspect to me as a fellow writer, to be able to look at a piece of writing and understand, okay, no, this is not my cup of tea. In some of the stories I knew almost immediately, I'm not really into this. This is not my kind of story. It doesn't mean it's not a good story, and it doesn't mean that the writer isn't a great writer. It just means the story's not for me. But that doesn't mean, even if the story's not for me, that I can't find something in it. Anyways, that's a bit of an aside, but it would be interesting for me to figure out a way to leverage the technology of being able to read the stories while I was driving or doing some other task. That's something I'll have to figure out in the future, but I'm sure there's technologies available that can assist me with that. I think the biggest challenge would be toggling between listening to the story and then maybe even just recording, saying, okay, here's what I thought about this story by this author, blah, 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 blah. I wouldn't be able to quote things because I can't see them while I'm driving, but it would at least give me some high-level way of capturing that feedback. So, because I'm not sure where I'm going with this yet next, I'm thinking that perhaps just talking through the challenge and laying out the things I need to get done and looking for solutions, the act of that in and of itself isn't only therapeutic, and this is self-therapy for me. I guess I've gotten used to this podcast being self-therapy. Thanks for being one of my therapists. But I think that's one of the reasons why when there is a challenge or you're facing something, talking it through with a friend, with somebody else, like a fellow writer, an editor, whatever that is, sometimes just the act alone of talking through what it is, maybe it's a plot hole, maybe it's a resolution of the story or something that you're struggling with. The very act of having to lay it out in such a way that you can talk about it with someone else, that in and of itself could potentially put your mind in the fix-it mindset or in the solution mindset rather than in the panic mindset. I know that that's kind of what's happened to me. When I first turned on the record button, I was a little freaked out because I wasn't really sure what I was doing and how I was going to get all the things done. But as I've started to lay out the different pieces of things that I need to do, I recognized, okay, just laying out the things I need to do, I'm starting to see some of the solutions. Not all of the solutions, but I'm starting to see some of the solutions on how I'm going to get those things done. Oh, the other thing I have to get done as well, sometimes, so before next Friday, before the 26th, I have about a 5 to 7 minute speech to write. I've been nominated by my fellow classmates. I'm very, very honored, very touched to be nominated as I think I may be the first author speaker at the graduation ceremonies. So I'm really honored that I get to represent this amazing class of phenomenal people. Not just my cohort, the publishing cohort, but the cohorts of nature writing and poetry and screenwriting and genre fiction. Just really, truly stellar people. I didn't get a chance to get to know many of them well, but of the people I did interact with last year, just some great people. So I'm honored, but I have the privilege of speaking at the ceremony. So I have to write my speech for that, and I want to write something that's worthwhile and inspiring and honors the experience of everyone. That's going to be a challenge. I need to get that done sometime, but I'm sure I will find some quiet time on campus alone next week where I can get some of that done. Especially once I'm there again and seeing the people in person again, I'm pretty sure that that's going to inspire some of the things that I'll add. And I'll probably still be writing that speech up until late Thursday night or even Friday morning, because the graduation is Friday afternoon. But another speech I have to write, and I've sort of started to put some notes together for it, is Liz and I are writing our wedding vows. And yes, we have joked about who's going to cry. I know I'm going to be bawling my eyes out, but I have some things I want to say about what Liz means to me. And I think if you're a long-time listener to this podcast, you probably have picked up on many of those things that Liz is to me. And I mean, she is, of course, the voice that closes the podcast, and was even a guest not all that long ago, where I actually had her come on and just so you can kind of get to meet her. But anyways, I have a lot of things I want to say about the past 10 years and how much I have learned and how much I have grown from having her in my life. And so I have to write that speech, and I think it's kind of an important speech, the vows. It's a really important thing, so I need to get that done, obviously, before the 29th. And Liz, being as much of a procrastinator as I am, I know she was planning on working on some of that when we were camping this past weekend, but I am pretty sure she'll still be working on her vows the morning of the wedding, as I will be. But that is, see, I wonder how many ums and ahs I said that I didn't even notice. I do try to cut those out because I pick up on the fact that I layer them into my speech way too often, and I'm trying very consciously to not do that. But I think that's it for this episode. I think I have worked through my things. So the lesson, again, is potentially, even if there's nobody there to talk to, turn on a recorder and lay out the challenge you're having, whether it's a writing struggle challenge, like with the actual creativity itself. Maybe it's a business aspect of your writer career and you're trying to figure something out. Or maybe, like me, it's a matter of, okay, I need to get this, and this done, and here are my various deadlines for them. When am I going to get this done? How am I going to get this done? Well, I hope you enjoyed this rambling reflection from the road. I still have 27 minutes before I get to my destination, but what I'm going to do to reward myself is I'm going to play from my Spotify playlist, Life of Mark, which is tons of songs, a very eclectic collection of songs that I love. I think it's publicly available, so we'll see if I can add a link to that in the show notes. But I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for letting me bend your ear. I want to thank you for being here for yet another week. I'll be back next week, next episode, with an interview with Rick Hipson on his book about writing interviews and reviews of books and how he got into that. If you're a writer of nonfiction, I'm sure you'll find some juicy nuggets in that conversation. But even if you're not a nonfiction writer, I know that Rick offers some really interesting insights into relationships in the publishing industry. But again, that's coming up in next week's episode. And so, until next week's episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.